MAGA infighting keeps getting worse. Right-wingers Tucker Carlson and Laura Loomer are ramping up their war of words. Carlson seems to have sparked the spat after telling the New York Times that Loomer is like a, quote, child wielding a loaded firearm called Twitter.
Loomer quickly responded on X, writing, quote, I'm so glad so many people are starting to see what a terrible person Tucker Carlson is. I'm glad people's eyes are opening to what a fraud this guy is. An hour later, she shot off another rather ominous post, writing, quote, do you want to know something about Tucker Carlson that nobody knows except me and about 3 other people? Something that should be the nail in his coffin that makes everyone realize what a fraud he is? The latest tussle between the pair follows months of discord over President Trump's foreign policy, specifically on Israel and Iran.
One person apparently unfazed is Trump himself. He praised Loomer while speaking with reporters on the tarmac. Take a look.
Very nice. I mean, I know she's known as a radical right, but I think Laura Loomer is a very nice person. I've known her for a long time. And, you know, personally, I think she's a patriot.
Lovely Laura Loomer, Robbie. What do you make? I mean, we were talking in an earlier segment about Democratic infighting. A lot of MAGA infighting these days. What do you make of it?
There is MAGA world influencer infighting going on. There's a lot happening right now with 4 people: Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Laura Loomer, and Nick Fuentes. Nick Fuentes is a very kind of far-right, alt-right associated, has strongly, I would say, wrong and discriminatory views against Jewish people and black people and other things, but is a staunch critic of Israel for various reasons, and is more of a non-interventionist figure. Laura Loomer is a very interventionist figure, which she was all in support of Israel, in support of what Iran is doing. And then Tucker is also a non-interventionist, but is having a feud with Fuentes that we don't really have time for today, but maybe we'll circle back to tomorrow because it's actually kind of interesting and indicative of, I think, where the young right is headed. And then there's Candace Owens, who's been feuding with Nick Fuentes, but it was on Tucker Carlson's show recently. It's all very interesting. Laura Loomer is not my favorite character. I think she does have Trump's ear, and she uses that to get rid of people she doesn't like. She got Vinay Prasad sacked from the administration. Not fired, he left of his own volition, but after getting a lot of negative attention to him. This figure, a COVID contrarian doctor, who I quite like, a lot of our viewers probably appreciate for his commentary, was brought into the FDA and is now out because she pointed to all these old tweets of his where he's in support of left Democrats. Yes, like RFK Jr., he was a Democrat, but some Democrats had interesting dissident perspectives on different topics, health or foreign policy, regardless of what it is, should be part of the administration. She schemes and uses connections or things you've said previously to get you unpersoned. And she has Trump's ear and attention. You see that. He likes her. She's ridden on an Air Force One with her. People try to keep her away from him, but he likes her. I think she's having a damaging effect on America First, on MAGA. She's a hawk. She wants to attack Iran. She wants all of those kinds of things. Tucker doesn't. Nick Fuentes doesn't. And others. So this is kind of the feud happening. It is ideological and also personality driven, right. But she's out there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that obviously a lot of it is personality driven, and she does have that tendency to go after people in a sort of, kind of the online equivalent of the flaming torches coming for you, the mob being set on you, and I don't love that, obviously. Also, I think just briefly on the Israel thing,
she does right-wing cancel culture. That's what she's trying to do at all times.
Right.
And she's effective at it. She's good at it. I mean, I'm not saying she does this job well, and she does her part to influence Trump in her direction. And I think it's not the direction I want Trump to go, but she's successful at it.
Right. Just very briefly on the Israel thing. On one hand, I think it's very interesting that there are these divides emerging on the right now, which had, I think, traditionally been very supportive of Israel. I do obviously want to be wary of people. I mean, Nick Fuentes I've no time for at all, and I would be wary of someone like him to the point where, is there some genuine anti-Semitism going on there or not? That's something you have to be careful about. Lots of reasons to criticize Israel's conduct in Gaza without entertaining prejudice of that type.
I think there's a lot that he is entertaining that is obviously very, very bad. I deplorable. I totally disagree with it, but he is getting attention right now. He's getting a following. It's genuine. He is tapping into something that needs to be addressed and discussed and debated and convinced people not to believe in it if that's the way we're going to go. But it can't be ignored, is what I'm saying. President Trump seems fed up with the fact that Democrats are slow-walking his federal government nominees.
The Senate is heading home after a deal between Senate Republicans, Democrats and the White House to confirm Trump's nominees blew up. As part of the deal, Democrats wanted no more DOGE-style rescissions packages and for the White House to unfreeze billions in NIH and foreign aid funding.
Trump, however, was not having it, writing in part on Truth Social, quote, "This demand is egregious and unprecedented and would be embarrassing to the Republican Party if it were to be accepted. It is political extortion by any other name. Tell Schumer, who's under tremendous political pressure from within his own party, the radical left lunatics take their deal elsewhere, so to speak." Trump then told Republicans not to accept Schumer's offer and to go home and tell their constituents how Democrats are bad people.
Schumer responded to Trump's Truth Social tirade. Let's watch that.
This says it all. Donald Trump tried to bully us, go around us, threaten us, call us names, but he got nothing. And he walked away with his tail between his legs. One of these days, Trump is going to have to learn that he needs to work with Democrats to help the American people. The Trump Republican go-it-alone strategy ain't working, and the American people aren't happy.
I love when they print out tweets or Truth Social posts and put them on poster boards. It just never looks fun, anything but funny to me. Some Republicans, by the way, are open to the idea of changing the rules to prevent Democrats from holding up votes, but they might not have the majority to do so, since some moderate Republicans say that move could come back to bite them. Senator John Cornyn wrote on X, however, that he looked forward to changing the rules to expedite Trump's nominees. I think he looks forward to doing anything that's going to prove what a based, MAGA, Trump-loving Republican he is, because he has to fend off a very difficult primary challenge in his state of Texas. Look, it's reasonable to think of it both ways, even from just a purely political standpoint. You change the rules in order to make it easier to get your nominees through, knowing that you very well could lose control of Congress or the presidency in the future. Which tools do Republicans want to make available for Democrats, and so on and so forth. The filibuster itself is like that. I tend to be more on the keep the weapons really blunt, because I don't want government to do that much anyway, so I might as well make it more difficult for both sides when they have full political power to use the system to much ends. And I'm not sure the deal that Schumer wanted that I even would take it from a Republican standpoint, because doing rescissions is a pretty important part, I think, of the agenda they ran on from their perspective, and is something they can do without changing the rules very much, so they can operate within the same system. So I'm not sure I would want to give that up in exchange for getting more nominees through. On the other hand, so judicial nominees, for instance, they serve a long, long time. You can really start tipping the scales in favor of conservative policy if you get more nominees through. So it's a difficult thing.
It is. I think that what we're seeing over the past several years is just a chipping away at those Senate procedures that used to empower the minority, or at least require some sort of cross-party agreement. And I suspect, whether you or I like it or not, that process is in fact going to continue, because a lot of the way the Senate in particular is set up seems to me predicated on something that no longer really happens, which is this idea of sort of good faith discussions, and we'll get some moderates from party X to cross and vote with party Y, and it doesn't really happen anymore. People vote the party line overwhelmingly. If they don't do so, they're immediately at danger of a primary challenge, and just the parties themselves have become much more ideologically homogenous than they were even in the, I would say, 60s or 70s, certainly. So, in order to get anything done, you're probably going to have to change those rules. I know that you don't like that, because you don't really want much to get done, if possible. I'm more of a fan of activist government, as you know. But overall, the point is that voters who elect a certain party to a majority, I think, are entitled to expect that that party can at least go a reasonable distance toward enacting its agenda. And if that just gets frozen up by sort of Senate arcana, then I think that's problematic.
I mean, you say it's different than the 60s and 70s. It's even different than the aughts.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah,
there was a time period within our lives where there were like 5 liberal Republicans and 5 conservative Democrats that could all switch places. Now it's like 2 Republicans and maybe John Fetterman on the other side are the only, not every single time, because then, Rand Paul has his own unique issues where he might stand against virtually the entire Senate, and there, could be very liberal Democrat, or like Josh Hawley right now is, trying to do something with Democrats that's very ideologically important to him. So it's not the case on every single issue, but the way our founders intended our legislature to function, that was before parties. They did not foresee, nor did they want parties to develop. Unfortunately, they created a system that, by the mechanics of it, very much favors a party structure. And over 200 years, as you said, our parties have finally moved in the direction of ideological rather than regional or whatever else it is.
Amalgamations.
Yes, various amalgamations,
yeah.
or being a kind of national Republican, but being a local Democrat, or having, depending on what the race is, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, was a dynamic, for instance, in the South for a long time. Now it's just you're down the line one or the other, and you're down the line supporting the policies of one or the other.
Sure.
And so there is not a lot of legislating to be done, and so it all kind of just falls. And there's just no confrontation between, for the most part, between the party and the president, the president's party. If they're in control of Congress, there's no tension between them for the most part.
Yeah. Do you not think, though, there is an issue where, I get, of course, that as a libertarian you don't particularly love massive government action, but do you not think there is an issue where the fact that the thing so often seizes up, in fact, fuels popular dissatisfaction with the political system itself? Because no matter which party you elect, right now the opposition party still has a fair amount of mechanisms to frustrate it.
I mean, I do. I hear that. It doesn't seem correctly or efficiently designed. I mean, I'm in support of reforms to move in a more parliamentary direction, or ranked choice voting, so that third parties could have an actual level of representation or something. I'm in favor of all those tweaks. It's just not going to happen ever. So it's being in favor of something that's totally beyond possible, because that would require, under the current system, the people who benefit from it, which is the 2 parties, to make any changes to reduce they're fine with it the way it is. They like complaining about it, but they're fine with it the way it is.
No, that's true. I mean,
so it's hard to get worked up about it. Yeah, I mean, I hear you. I certainly wish Congress, I've said this a lot, served as a more effective check on the president in terms of foreign policy and a lot of other subjects, and they don't by the nature of their dysfunction. So that's not good. I wish that their paralysis ends up yielding a lot of deference to federal agencies that I don't think is proper, and I certainly don't think is liberty enhancing. If issues that no elected representative really had to contemplate are now just being foisted on some agency you never heard of, who you have no accountability over, I think that's bad for freedom. So that's the aspect of that I'm most unhappy with.
No, I mean, I do take the point that each party has a vested interest in maintaining the status quo, and that's what makes any kind of fundamental reform of these topics so pretty difficult.
Sad.
That's how it is.
You may remember former ABC reporter Terry Moran. He was the one fired by the network shortly after making a social media post where he said, among other things, that senior Trump advisor Stephen Miller was, quote, richly endowed with the capacity for hatred. Well, he's now admitting the networks are, in fact, biased. Moran wrote on Substack, quote, I worked at ABC News for almost 28 years. I'm proud to say that. A lot of good people do a lot of really good work there, and they try hard to get the story right. But were we biased? Yes, almost inadvertently, I'd say. Moran writes, saying that the bias from mainstream media is not malevolent in nature, stems instead from a lack of viewpoint diversity. Quote, there are hardly any people who supported Donald Trump at ABC News or the other networks. This is bound to impact coverage, not so much out of malevolent bias, the cartoon version peddled by Trump, more out of a kind of what is a kind of deafness. He continues, yes, news teams go out with a microphone and a camera and accost people at Trump rallies, but to me that often comes off as weirdly anthropological and inaccurate. kind of like trying to understand nature by visiting a zoo.
This indictment of network media came in the middle of an article by Moran slamming the FCC's approval of the Paramount Skydance merger, or more specifically the demand from the FCC that CBS, owned by Paramount, would need to appoint a bias monitor for their coverage. Or, as Moran put it, the Trump FCC demanded an in-house stooge at the news division to alert the corporate bosses when the journalists get out of line and exhibit bias. The federal government has no business dictating the editorial content of news coverage, Moran continued. This isn't Viktor Orban's Hungary, or the Law and Justice Party's Poland, or Putin's Russia in the late 1990s, when free voices critical of the Kremlin could still be heard before he crushed them. He goes on, yes, from my perspective, the old news networks are biased, but Brendan Carr can go to hell. Brendan Carr, we should say, the head of the FCC and the person who's trying to impose these conditions on CBS and Paramount, like the bias monitor, which is a concept that I think Mr. Stalin or Mr. Lenin would be happy with.
Bias monitor is not a phrase I like very much. It's not one I've appreciated when it's been on college campuses, for instance, when they're looking out for incidents of bias, going back to the radar I discussed. Yeah, look, they should be free to be biased, obviously. Trying to weigh and calculate and measure and police bias of this sort in coverage is also a little bit weird because, I mean, then we're just getting to a version of net neutrality where if they have this much pro-Republican, they got to have this much anti-Republican. I would find that ridiculous if applied to Fox News or Newsmax or any other thing. Now, and then it's cable versus, so I know the licenses work differently and that's all, but to me, these are becoming archaic distinctions in an era where the internet and streaming exists. Yeah. Private companies should broadly be allowed to set whatever policies, editorial policies they want. It's not the business of the federal government. And all the times I complained when the Democratic administrations were doing sort of monetary things or jawboning to social media companies I was against, this is just like that. I think they should just let the merger happen and not try to police the aspects of the editorial content.
No, absolutely. And the policing of the editorial content is, I think, quite obviously and flagrantly an attempt by the Trump administration to ensure friendlier coverage of them. To Terry Moran's other point about diversity, I actually think he does have a point in how diversity is defined. And I think it is a legitimate criticism of the left or parts of the left that the word diversity is often used to mean quite a narrow spectrum of diversity.
Right.
And there's certainly I think a segment of what I would consider sort of NPR liberalism, which when they say diversity really means a person with of a different race who agrees with me about everything else. And I think that isn't diversity. Now, I would be in favor.
There's also never Trump diversity,
right?
Where they add a Republican,
right? Who's
Nicole Wallace,
exactly a fake or former Republican,
right.
And that happens, quite a lot, and it's people. Conservative columnist Jennifer Rubin, who has not espoused any conservative belief for years, as far as I can tell. Right. Now, I mean, particularly when it comes to that, what I would like to see as a broader concept of diversity, I have argued for years that class is understated or underappreciated as an important part of diversity. Working class people, regardless of what liberal or conservative ideology they hold, are vastly underrepresented in the media.
Which did not always used to be the case.
Exactly.
It was a working class job, as Batya Ungar-Sargon has written a great book about that.
Yeah, and it used to be much more working class. I think part of the reason that it has ceased to become so is the vast fees that colleges charge. We were just talking about this in yesterday's Rising, where people are $50,000-$60,000 a year tuition fees to have a journalism degree. Neither you nor I know, have an official journalism qualification. We just
it's a very overrated degree.
It really is.
I mean, there are good journalism schools, to be clear,
but
journalism is, I always say this, is more of a craft than it is an area of study. Obviously, you can study anything,
Right.
but done by very expert people who've contemplated the philosophical implications of the job or the subject. But it is more writing is something you can be instructed in. You get better just by doing it. The skills you get they're not best taught in a classroom. It's just you shadow a journal. You serve as an intern at a magazine or newspaper or TV studio. You learn how it's done. That's it. That's the education.
Yeah, and it is predominantly learnt by the doing of it rather than the theoretical study of it. And I think that is really important. So I'm in favour of diversity. I'm against the government interfering or appointing bias monitors that they will determine what is bias and what isn't. So I seem to be the Terry Moran of the situation as far as I can tell.
Yeah, completely, because it's not, people's ideologies are more complicated too than just like, oh, a right person, a liberal person. I'm sure left people feel just as underrepresented in mainstream media. That's something Brianna would always talk about. As conservatives do. It's just, like you said, very narrowly permitted range of what constitutes diversity. And then the news opinion distinction is the other elephant in the room, is that it's all, they're not even supposed to be expressing an opinion at all, the straight news reporters, but they all do have their own opinions, which is increasingly just a totally outmoded means of information distribution. We will move to a let your freak flag fly. Let me know your opinion.
I think you're right that we will. I think that is actually quite a difficult thing in this particular moment, because there are still the remnants of the idea of a wall of separation between the two, and then increasingly in newer forms of media that distinction isn't there at all. And if you look at certain networks, like for example, the main cable, well, CNN less so, but Fox and MSNBC, both have this distinction that you're kind of just supposed to understand, that the dayside programming is purportedly less opinion-based and more straight news, and the evening is more opinionated, but those lines can get very fuzzy.
Well, the host is ostensibly kind of doing news, and then just bringing on personalities to discuss and debate. It's an interesting format.
For sure.
Comedian Bill Maher has some words of criticism for President Trump's so-called war on academia. He made the comments on his show this past weekend. Let's watch.
Academia needed a hot poker up the I'm not saying not everything the way he's doing it, of course, is the right way. To defund scientific research is not the way to do it. But I mean, our universities have been out of control for a long time. They became indoctrination factories. They forgot there's absolutely no diversity of thought.
Maher's comments come after Brown University reached a deal with the Trump administration to restore federal funding for research and end investigations into alleged discrimination. The agreement also comes shortly after Columbia struck a $221 million settlement with the administration. It's also reported that Harvard is in talks to end its funding pause, though there are some disputes about exactly how accurate those reports are.
Trump took to Truth Social to tout the deal with Brown, writing, "Congratulations to Brown University on the settlement made with the United States government. There will be no more anti-Semitism or anti-Christian or anti-anything else. Woke is officially dead at Brown." How nice. How about that?
Trump administration getting its tentacles into universities once again.
Yes. Well, again, this is, an issue where you and I have a lot of agreement. I don't really think that Trump administration, or any administration for that matter, should be micromanaging the policies. Now, that said, they are the recipients of massive amounts of federal public taxpayer dollars. Those come with some strings attached. There's nothing new about them coming with some strings attached. They've come with strings attached under the Biden administrations and under the Obama administrations and probably under administrations before that. So some of this, I did read through the entire Brown settlement. Some of the things in it I have no problem with. Aspects of it you can't do race-based admissions and hiring. The Supreme Court has at this point basically ruled almost all of that out anyway. Voters have rejected it over and over again. It's becoming more and more of a settled issue where you just can't do this no matter how much you want to if you're going to take federal funding at all. So that's not really an egregious thing to me. I mean, it's a policy I support, and the Supreme Court has said you shouldn't be doing it. So fine. There are aspects of it that it's not so much dictating curriculum as was with the Columbia settlement.
Columbia was very bad in that respect.
But what it was setting up, and I might actually do an entire radar on this because I wrote about this for a reason, and people should read my piece in lieu of that. There's a lot of, Brown will be required to do surveys of students for whether they feel harassed, particularly whether they feel harassed online. And the goal is because anti-Semitism and Jewish people have felt harassed, but online harassment is a really nebulous concept. Also, it is not obvious to me that Brown University has any responsibility to police it. Well, what if it's not students, or even if it is students, who cares? And then harassment can just be, I know what's going to happen. Someone is going to have say a very pro-Israel opinion, and then someone else is going to attack them, and they're going to say, I'm being harassed because I'm Jewish, and then it gets into this, well, no, you're being criticized because you're pro-Israel. That it's just we don't need to litigate that whatsoever. It's just whatever, it's on social media, sorry.
Yeah.
Social media can be a rough place. Trust me, I know.
Yeah,
That
both know.
You're right, you just got to, honestly, you got to develop you should develop a thick skin about that. If the university has any business, it's probably encouraging you to be more prepared for real life and the kinds of that's how the internet works. I don't really want them compiling, and then you're going to have it necessitates, or it causes some kind of secret police thing where there's going to be more administrators whose job is to make sure everybody on campus feels snowflake, precious, protected all the time. Now we're just back to all the woke stuff.
Well, I agree with that part of it. I think that the whole purpose of universities or any institution of higher learning should be the exchange of ideas that can be robust. It shouldn't be personally abusive, certainly not under official university auspices. But the whole point is to be confronted with ideas with which you do not agree. It's a way of testing out your own beliefs. It's essentially what we do here, which is we argue back and forth, and you tighten up your own arguments, or you get persuaded of the merits of another argument. All of that, I think, is fine and important. What I have the objection to in relation to, you mentioned the Columbia settlement as distinct from the Brown one, is the degree to which it gives the administration the capacity to really reach into the workings of the university and appoint certain people, or veto some appointments, or veto certain lessons. I think that's totally unacceptable. Briefly, just two other things. On the point of funding, it is true that there's a lot of federally funded research, but to me, choking that off is a self-defeating thing on the part of the administration, or in the part of the country as a whole. Those funds are being spent to have extremely able scientists and other researchers delve into things that there can ultimately be a public good to. It is an investment in research. And then just the final point, circling back to Bill Maher, I mean, he has this issue with universities. In his case, it seems to largely be driven by his very strong support of Israel and what I would consider his very unfair characterization of some of the pro-Palestinian protests. But for him to argue on one level, it's important for there to be diversity of thought, which I agree with. Trump has no interest in diversity of thought. I think it's totally naive to suggest that that is what is motivating any of the administration's moves.
Well, I'll give Bill Maher some credit there, because he's done a lot of monologues on his shows about problems he sees in higher education. Not just the lack of diversity of thought, but the proliferation of whatever you want to call it, the pejoratively referred to as the grievance studies departments, academic studies departments that I would say are much less scientifically rigorous, or play into trendy concepts about identity, and also are more likely to ensnare people who take on debt to go to college, and then these don't necessarily generate favorable economic conditions for you in the workforce. So they're also kind of bad in that way. and those have really increased. And then the number one thing I don't like about is not even academia itself, but at so many of these universities, the administrative bloat is just insane, and that's really driving up the cost of higher education, a cost that is then partly subsidized by the government itself because they pay for your tuition, but then you pay it back later in confusing terms that aren't necessarily clear to you, the 17-year-old deciding all this, that is kind of scammy. It's a system that's kind of not great in a lot of ways. So while I'm happy to have the government fund some level of scientific research, depending on what the research is. Yeah, I don't want to immediately choke off all the insights into cancer and other things. Sure, fine. Although I also don't like being emotionally extorted in a way. We can never cut anything because people are going to die of cancer if we never cut anything. These are very wealthy institutions, Harvard, Columbia, and others. They have massive endowments. And then it's like, well, we're going to exercise some level of control over your policies or how money is spent if it's going to be publicly funded. If you just want to do your own thing, then you can do your own thing, but then you're not going to be publicly funded. And they want it both ways. Yeah. They want the money, but don't tell us what to do at all with it. That is kind of, it's untenable in this political moment.
Just when you mention about things like the administrative bloat and the rising costs, higher education and its costs, that's one of the topics that I am I suppose, a bit of a conspiracy theorist about, in the sense that I think that the cost has become so extortionate and the government willingness to meet that cost so low that essentially it is firstly cutting off college education from some less well-off people. And secondly, I think it is, by the nature of the cost and the need to recoup that cost, it is essentially driving people into things like business and law and things that have an obvious economic great return, rather than things that encourage critical thinking or critical analysis. And it basically is a system that is designed to create automatons, and that's what I have the objection to.
Interesting.
Teamsters Union President Sean O'Brien is sounding off in all things former Vice President Kamala Harris and the 2024 election, spilling his thoughts on why he thinks the Democrats lost. He made comments Tuesday on Free Press founder-editor Bari Weiss's podcast. Let's watch.
Democrats lost, and I think you made a good point earlier. They fell in love with their captors. They fell in love with big money. They fell in love with big tech, and they forgot who they truly representing, working people. The Democrats forgot that they need to be in their communities where they represent, talking to people, finding out and identifying the issues that truly matter. Look, this whole election for the Democrats was based on social justice issues.
O'Brien also skewered what he called a smug Kamala Harris for a tense meeting she had with the union. Let's take a look.
Joan goes in the line, and Joan says, "I'm Joan Corey. I'm a vice president with the Teamsters Union." And she pointed her finger at Joan and said, "Teamsters better get on board." And so Joan says, "Excuse me? Yeah, Teamsters better get on board. I don't know why you haven't endorsed me yet." So she comes back and she tells me this, and I'm like, the nerve. Her closing was, "Listen, I'm going to win with you or without you." And it was like such a smug answer, like, okay. And that turned the majority of the people in that room off her.
So despite O'Brien's comments, Fox News and AP 2024 voter analysis shows a majority of union members supported Harris for president. As a reminder, the Teamsters declined to make an endorsement for president, breaking a long history of endorsing Democrats dating back to 1996. The group was the only one out of the nation's 10 major unions not to endorse her.
And that was on the heels of a survey of its members where they found that the majority supported Trump. And so instead of endorsing Trump, they decided just to not endorse anybody, which was still a break in tradition of unions typically endorsing Democrats. But I think the importance of what it showed was really a split between union leadership and the voting members. And I'd be interested to see the breakdown of voting in the 2024 election from, let's say, manufacturing or auto worker unions versus unions writ large, because those numbers, of course, include teachers' unions, which are sort of a different animal than what we're talking about with people in Detroit and Kenosha and Milwaukee.
Right, and I think, the Teamsters feel abandoned, and they're emphasizing that. This is the common theme about the complaint with the Democratic Party. So received, and hopefully the Democratic Party should have received that. But my question is, what has President Trump and the Republicans done for you? There has to be some type of conversation about how this is better than this, and not to say, it doesn't work to say, oh, we're offering nothing really, but we're a better option than this. That worked maybe with Joe Biden, and then that's not going to work again. The people want you to be offering them something that they're interested in. But when I looked at Trump's history, he kind of had an all-out assault on unions' rights from 2016. I mean, he stripped away for protections with a 60% rise for the Department of Rank and File Veteran Affairs, so they weren't able to move around in the way that they would before when they had Democrats supporting them. He targeted freedoms and workplace issues, so when there was a complaint, they had less opportunities to make those freely without risking getting fired or worried about training and overtime, telework, and all those kind of things. So he didn't really make it easier for unions. He also cut, I think, 1.5 trillion, which is he actually gave 1.5 trillion to the rich, which robbed money from the workplace when he tried to first institute those tax cuts. And so people felt like the union should have got more money for benefits and opportunities that protect workers. And he made this big promise in 2016 that he was going to protect unions and workers, but I don't know that he lived up to it even in his first term. So you have an exact example of him not doing what I think he was supposed to do. And we talk about the AFL-CIO, which is a huge union that usually does support Democrats. This is a quote from this AFL-CIO president. In his first term as president, Donald Trump was a disaster for workers and our union. The Trump Project 2025 agenda lays out his plan to turbocharge his anti-worker policies, eliminate or control unions, and eviscerate labor laws and worker contracts. So if you said 9 out of 10 unions still went for Democrats and this one Teamsters did not, what is the conversation that they're looking for to happen from Republicans is all I want to know, is what is being offered that's a better option. And not endorsing somebody is perfectly fine with me.
Yeah, and again, I would just go back to the fact that a lot of the rank and file have very different feelings about politics than the union leadership. And, my dad was in a union for his entire career, and this was something that was a common theme where the people that he was in the shop with had very different politics than the people who were making the endorsements, and they would send out magazines with Hillary Clinton's face on it, even though most of the guys that he was working with on the job on a daily basis ended up supporting Donald Trump. But I think some of the things that the Trump administration and Republicans will be running on are things like getting rid of EV mandates, which have proven to be a huge issue for auto workers because those plants have found that the EV market has basically been tapped out at this point. It's leveled off. And so all of this investment that they've been making in EVs has caused them to diminish profits. He'll also certainly talk about the USMCA, which was a huge improvement from NAFTA, which led to a lot of jobs being shipped overseas, as well as the tariff policy, which is aimed at reshoring American manufacturing, as well as deregulation of the corporate environment and particularly energy, because energy inputs are one of the most expensive aspects for any business. So having American energy dominance and independence is a huge selling point, I think, for anyone working in a manufacturing job.
Yeah, and I think that there are people that can say on both sides what they've done or having interests, because like you said, these bigger leadership positions don't represent every single worker. But I want both parties. That was a charge for me to say, even though Democrats are resting on their laurels since 1996, because perhaps some things that they put in place have helped unions and workers benefit to make sure that they're protected in the right ways with programs and packages, like if they're hurt on the job and all these kind of incentives to make sure that they're covered properly. I do think that doesn't mean that because one party fails you, you should endorse another party or just go back to the same old, same old. I think unions should call people to task on both sides of the aisle and tell them exactly what they're looking for, because for some people it may be making sure that they have better insurance in a union job, and for other people it might be making sure that we have these EV mandates updated to a standard that allows me to continue working as somebody who works at General Motors. And so I think there's a nuanced conversation that needs to be had with just making sure that people feel seen. Like, we're speaking for all of the union workers, which is a lot of the country. Right. And it's like you said 9 or 10 people that are leaders, like, okay, this is what we're going to do. It's almost like the situation with the Washington Post not endorsing a president anymore and saying that they're going to stop doing that. That is a similar change of tide where people are like, well, this kind of speaks, even though it's the board, it speaks for the paper, and maybe it's time to stop doing things the way that we used to do things. I think that's the resounding message, at least for the Democratic Party, and what they should take away from this interview.
And your point about nuance is well taken, because I think the move specifically in the blue wall states toward Trump in 2016, which was really driven by a lot of those union voters, was really not a partisan thing. It was more about Trump being an outsider and someone who promised to bring massive change to the system, a system that they felt was failing them for decades, with the offshoring of manufacturing, with their cities being hollowed out by those companies moving out of the country, or even in right-to-work states in the South. And Trump was not just a Republican to them, he was someone who was a disruptor. And that, I think, is what they really voted for.
Right. So I think we're going to be watching this a lot more, especially with the midterms coming up and the next election. But it'll be interesting to see if they Teamsters kind of keep the stance of like, well, no one's representing us, or if they jump back in the game with a new party, with Elon Musk's party, with any party that's available. They could go libertarian like Robbie, or they could go back to the Democratic side.
Something tells me Elon Musk is not going to be a union voter champion, but we shall see.